Welcome to the truth, dark psychology. We are taught to admire the architecture of genius. We celebrate the individual who starts in a garage and builds an empire that redefines the world. But what if the most impressive structure he ever built isn't the company, but the ego itself? What if the public image of a customer-obsessed leader is just a facade for an internal need for absolute control? A narcissism so perfectly organized that it becomes invisible to most? Today, we will dismantle the persona of a tech titan to examine the psychological engineering behind his rise. If you dare to question the narrative sold to us, subscribe and turn on notifications. The truth is more complex than it seems. Every great narrative of power begins with an origin myth, and Jeff Bezos is a masterpiece of perceptual psychology. The image of the brilliant yet accessible man who leaves a lucrative Wall Street career to sell books from a garage with a desk made from an old door is irresistible. This is not just a biographical fact. It is the cornerstone of a public persona. The door desk symbolizes frugality, a focus on what matters, and a purity of purpose. It tells us that he was not driven by greed, but by a vision. It is an image that disarms criticism and builds an emotional connection with the public, who see in him innovative outsider, not a future corporate predator. This initial narrative is crucial for masking the relentless ambition that was always present. Psychologically, by presenting himself as a humble visionary, he created a shield against scrutiny. Who could attack a man so focused on serving customers and saving every penny to deliver low prices? This customer obsession, Amazon's most famous mantra, was the perfect public relations tool. It transformed a predatory business strategy into an act of service, making any criticism of the company seem like an attack on consumer well-being. The focus on us, the company and its customers, versus them, inefficient competition, is a classic tactic of unification and loyalty building. The genius here lies not just in logistics or technology, but in the construction of a corporate identity that reflects a calculated idealism. The day one philosophy, the idea that the company must always operate with the urgency and mentality of a startup, is another pillar of this myth. It projects an image of agility, constant innovation, and an aversion to the stagnant bureaucracy of large corporations. However, behind this facade, this mentality justifies relentless internal pressure and a refusal to accept the stability that employees of a mature company would expect, keeping everyone in a state of maximum alert and productivity. Controlling the narrative from the beginning allowed Bezos to define the terms of the game. He wasn't just building a store. He was building an ecosystem where he was the benevolent creator. This image was carefully nurtured in his annual letters to shareholders, which became artifacts of his leadership philosophy. They reinforced the long-term vision, the willingness to be misunderstood, and the dedication to the customer. Each letter was a lesson in how to structure a corporate ego, where the identity of the leader and the company merge into a single, seemingly benevolent entity. However, dark psychology invites us to ask, what did this image of humility and customer focus truly hide? Was it the genuine expression of an idealist or the most sophisticated of masks, designed to allow the construction of a monopoly without the public realizing the true nature of the game? The answer lies in the dissonance between the public image and the internal reality of the machine. He created a reality far colder and more calculating. Behind the facade of Earth's most customer-centric company, a culture of efficiency flourished that often bordered on the inhuman. Bezos's obsession with metrics and data was not just a management tool. It was the manifestation of an ego seeking absolute order and control, even if it meant treating human beings as variables in an algorithm. Reports about the working conditions in Amazon's warehouses, where every second is monitored and productivity is pushed to physical and mental extremes, reveal the dark side of customer obsession. The benefit for the consumer was, in fact, paid for with the well-being of the employee. The psychology behind this dynamic is that of compartmentalization. Bezos demonstrated an incredible ability to separate the company's public identity from its internal practices. Tools like the Anytime Feedback tool, where colleagues could secretly rate each other, created an environment of distrust and internal competition, a true corporate coliseum. This tactic, worthy of manipulation manuals, ensures that employee loyalty is directed vertically towards management and not horizontally among peers, preventing the formation of solidarity that could challenge the system. Bezos's famous outbursts of anger and his cutting phrases such as, "Are you lazy or just incompetent?" and "Why are you wasting my life?" are not just signs of a difficult temperament. They are tools of psychological control. By creating an environment of fear and high pressure, he establishes a nearly unattainable performance standard, ensuring that everyone operates at the limit of their capabilities. It is the application of a narcissistic pressure on the organization. The company's performance is a direct extension of his own ego, and any failure is felt as a personal offense. This structure reveals an ego that is more comfortable with systems than with people. People are unpredictable, emotional, and inefficient. Systems, on the other hand, are logical, controllable, and optimizable. Amazon's culture was Bezos's project to turn human labor into a system as predictable as the movement of his Kiva robots. The obsession was not truly with the customer, but with the creation of a perfect machine to serve the customer, a machine of which he was the undisputed architect and master. The narcissism here is not the type that seeks constant applause, but the type that finds satisfaction in the creation and mastery of a perfect system, a reflection of his own orderly and relentless mind. The admiration he seeks comes not from compliments, but from the proof that his system is superior, more efficient, and more dominant than any other. The customer is merely the pretext and the justification for the tireless pursuit of this systemic perfection. Jeff Bezos's approach to competition reveals a predatory mindset that goes far beyond healthy market competition. The famous directive he gave his executives to approach small publishers, the way a cheetah pursues a sickly gazelle, is perhaps the clearest window into his dark psychology. This is not the language of a businessman, but that of a predator. It dehumanizes the opponent, turning them into mere prey, and justifies any tactic, no matter how aggressive, as part of the natural law of the fittest. This hunting mentality has shaped Amazon's expansion strategy. The company routinely enters new markets, identifies the best-selling products of third-party sellers on its platform, creates its own cheaper versions, and promotes them aggressively, crushing the small entrepreneurs who helped build the market. This is not just business. It is a form of corporate cannibalism, where the platform deliberately consumes its own inhabitants to strengthen its dominance. It is the structured ego in a strategy of total control over the ecosystem. Psychologically, this approach indicates a lack of empathy on the business battlefield. For Bezos, companies and competitors are not entities composed of people with dreams and families. They are pieces on a global chessboard, to be captured or eliminated in his quest for victory. The pleasure seems to come not just from success, but from complete domination. The annihilation of the competition is not a regrettable side effect, but an objective in itself, the definitive proof of the superiority of his system, and, by extension, of his intellect. This predatory impulse also manifests in his famous aversion to paying taxes, seeking legal loopholes to minimize Amazon's contribution, while benefiting massively from public infrastructure. It is the mindset of one who sees himself as being above the system that governs others. The rules apply to the gazelle, not the cheetah. This narcissistic worldview justifies extracting value from society without the corresponding responsibility to contribute, as he believes his vision and his company's efficiency are already sufficient contributions to humanity. Asterisk. The legacy of this mentality is a distorted market. where innovation is often stifled by the fear of attracting the predators. Attention. Many entrepreneurs avoid certain sectors, knowing that if they succeed, Amazon can simply replicate their product and eliminate them from the market. Bezos' structured ego not only built an empire, but also cast a shadow over the innovation landscape, where the fear of his reaction has become an economic factor as powerful as traditional market forces. Few things illustrate the evolution of Jeff Bezos' ego as visually as his stunning physical transformation. The change from the ordinary-looking and somewhat awkward man of the 90s to the muscular billionaire, with toned arms and impeccable style, is not just the result of a healthy lifestyle. It is a statement of power. It is the physical manifestation of an ego that, after building the world's most dominant empire, turned to optimizing the body itself, became the final product of his own system of continuous improvement. This metamorphosis coincides with Amazon's rise to global domination and Bezos' ascent to the position of the world's richest man. Psychologically, building an imposing physique is a way to project dominance and vitality. The image of the nerd who wins through intelligence has been replaced by that of the titan who dominates completely, both intellectually and physically. It is body armor that signals to the world that he is no longer just a player in the game. He is the game itself. The control he exerted over the markets, he now displayed over his own biology. His fashion style has kept pace with this change. The baggy shirts and khaki pants gave way to tight leather jackets, aviator sunglasses, and custom-made suits. This new persona, often compared to that of a Hollywood action hero, is a form of personal rebranding. It communicates a new phase of his power, less focused on operational construction and more on the exercise of global influence. Alongside his fiancée at gala events and on his mega yacht, he projects an image of power that transcends the corporate world and enters the sphere of cultural and social power. This transformation can also be seen as a narcissistic response to his own mortality and vulnerability. After facing a high-profile divorce and the transition out of the CEO role at Amazon, rebuilding his physical image can be interpreted as an act of reasserting control at a time of personal change. He was showing the world that even as he stepped away from the daily command of his empire, his personal strength and power were not diminishing but rather enhancing. It was a way of saying, I am the system, I am the power, not the position I hold. Finally, this image change has a profound impact on public perception. The muscular billionaire is more intimidating, more worthy of a movie villain, at some point out, but also more charismatic and powerful in the eyes of many. His famous laugh, once seen as awkward, now sounds to many like the laugh of someone who knows he has won. The physical metamorphosis completed the construction of the myth, transforming the architect of systems into an almost mythological figure, a titan of our digital age whose power seems absolute and unrestricted. We are diving deep into the psyche of one of the most powerful men on the planet. If this analysis is making you question appearances, then we are on the right track. Don't forget to leave a like to support our work, subscribe to The Truth, Dark Psychology, and comment below which other powerful figure you'd like to see deconstructed in our next video. Now let's continue. When a man conquers the world of commerce, the next logical step for a structured and insatiable ego is to seek control over the pillars of society itself, information, and the future. Jeff Bezos' acquisition of the Washington Post in 2013 was not a mere financial investment. It was the acquisition of one of the most influential institutions in shaping public and political opinion. For a master of systems, controlling the flow of information is the final move on the chessboard of power, allowing him to shape the narrative not only about his company, but about the world itself. Although he promised to maintain the newspaper's editorial independence, the mere ownership of the institution by a man with vast commercial and political interests creates an inherent conflict. Dark psychology teaches us that power does not need to be exercised explicitly to be effective. The mere awareness of who the owner is can subtly influence editorial decisions, the agendas chosen, and the criticisms that are made, or more importantly, those that are not. It is a form of passive but omnipresent control that demonstrates a desire not just to participate in the game, but to own the casino. In parallel, the creation of Blue Origin, his space exploration company, represents the ambition to control the future of humanity itself. The vision of moving heavy industry into space to save the Earth sounds like altruism, but it is also the grandest of power narratives. Positioning oneself as the architect of humanity's future on a cosmic scale is the pinnacle of the Messiah complex. He doesn't just want to sell things to people on Earth. He wants to decide where civilization itself will go, laying the groundwork for a future society where his technologies and his vision will be fundamental. This desire to play a God game is a common trait in certain types of high-functioning narcissistic personalities. After exhausting terrestrial challenges, the ego turns to the final frontier. The space race against other billionaires is not just about technological innovation. It is a competition of legacies, a contest to see who will be remembered as the savior or the father of humanity's next era. It is the quest for immortality through the construction of a future of which he will forever be the founding architect. Control of information through the Washington Post and the attempt to control the destiny of humanity with Blue Origin are two sides of the same coin. A structured ego that seeks to expand beyond all limits. The Amazon machine was just the first act. The real goal seems to be the re-engineering of society and the future itself, putting his mark not only on the packages we receive at home, but on the newspaper we read and the stars we look up to. For many years, Jeff Bezos was notoriously criticized for his apparent lack of interest in philanthropy, especially when compared to other billionaires like Bill Gates or Warren Buffett. This initial reluctance is psychologically revealing. For an ego structured around building efficient and dominant systems, traditional philanthropy can seem inefficient, sentimental, and lacking a clear return on investment. Donating money without building a controllable system around it goes against the very nature of his mind. Charity, in its pure form, is an act of surrender, not of control. When public pressure and the need to manage his image became unsustainable, his approach to philanthropy emerged, predictably, in a highly structured and systemic form. The creation of funds like the Day One Fund and the Bezos Earth Fund was not just an act of donation, but the creation of new machines. He was not simply giving money away. He was building new platforms to exert influence, this time under the guise of benevolence. It is the engineer's mindset applied to compassion, trying to optimize and scale generosity, as if it were a distribution center. This reactive and calculated philanthropy raises questions about the motivation behind it. Is it a genuine desire to solve social problems, or a public relations strategy to mitigate criticism about Amazon's labor practices and its tax avoidance? Dark psychology suggests that for certain personalities, philanthropy can be the ultimate form of control, a way to shape society according to their own values and priorities, ensuring their legacy is seen not as that of a predator, but as that of a savior. It is the purchase of a positive narrative. The very language he uses when speaking of his philanthropic projects is that of a venture capitalist. He seeks scalable solutions and long-term returns for humanity. While this may seem pragmatic, it also reveals an emotional detachment from the problems he claims to want to solve. Hunger, homelessness, and the climate crisis are not presented as human tragedies requiring an empathetic response, but as complex engineering problems that need a brilliant solution, preferably one he can design and control. Ultimately, Bezos's philanthropic journey seems to be the search for a new system to build and dominate. The void left by the absence of genuine empathy is filled by the satisfaction of creating yet another efficient machine. The world becomes a laboratory for his grand ideas, and humanity, the beneficiary of his systemic genius, whether we want it or not. Philanthropy thus becomes the final frontier for the expansion of his structured and insatiable ego. In the end, what is the psychological lesson we can draw from the rise of Jeff Bezos? The deepest lesson is about the nature of power in the digital age and the seduction of a structured ego. Bezos showed us that the most potent form of narcissism in the 21st century is not the pursuit of personal adoration, but the construction of a self-perpetuating system that reflects the will and mind of its creator. He didn't need us to love him. He needed us to become so dependent on his creation, Amazon, that we couldn't imagine life without it. The legacy he leaves is proof that obsession can be a superpower. His obsession with efficiency, the customer, and long-term growth created the most impressive logistics machine in human history. However, this same obsession, when devoid of empathy, created a trail of crushed competition, exploited employees, and a concentration of power that challenges the very fabric of our economies and democracies. Genius and danger walk hand in hand, both fueled by the same psychological source. The dark psychology of Jeff Bezos is that of order taken to the extreme. It is the mindset of an architect who sees the world as a set of problems to be solved through cold logic and efficient systems, where human beings are just one component, often the most troublesome one, that needs to be optimized. This worldview is incredibly effective for building an empire, but it can be profoundly destructive to the social fabric, which depends on qualities like empathy, community, and compassion, characteristics often absent in algorithms. He forces us to confront an uncomfortable question. Are we complicit in the construction of his power? By choosing the convenience of a click and one-day delivery, did we feed the machine that personifies his ego? Customer obsession worked because he understood a fundamental truth about human psychology. We, most of the time, choose the path of least resistance. He didn't manipulate us with lies, but with the inconvenient truth of our own desires for instant gratification. Jeff Bezos's structured ego, therefore, is not just a personal phenomenon. It is a mirror for our age. It reflects our admiration for efficiency, our submission to convenience, and our willingness to ignore the human costs in exchange for systemic perfection. To understand his psychology is, ultimately, to understand the invisible forces that shape our world and the choices we make within the perfectly built system he has bequeathed to us. The line between a genius and a benevolent tyrant may be finer than we imagine. The story of Jeff Bezos is the story of an ego that not only sought power, but structured it into a global system of which we are all now a part. To continue unraveling the minds behind the power, subscribe now to The Truth, Dark Psychology. Turn on notifications to be the first to know when the truth comes to light. And most importantly, leave your thoughts in the comments. Is Jeff Bezos the architect of a better future, or the master of a gilded cage we helped build ourselves? Think about it.